The moment Emma said, "This is my boyfriend," I knew she was lying. Not because I had caught her sneaking around with someone. Not because she had ever looked at me like she wanted us to be anything more than roommates. I knew because the men sitting beside her at her family's Thanksgiving dinner looked at me with the same confused panic I felt. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Emma's mother dropped a serving spoon into the mashed potatoes. And her father, a broad-shouldered man named Richard, who had spent the previous hour telling me how much he hated surprises, slowly lowered his glass. I stared at Emma. She stared at me. Then she whispered through a smile that looked painful enough to break her face, "Please, Jake. Just go with it." I should have said no. I should have stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out of that beautiful suburban house in Columbus, Ohio, before her family decided I was part of some ridiculous romantic disaster. Instead, I looked at Emma's trembling hands beneath the table. And I said, "Yeah. I'm her boyfriend." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Emma squeezed my knee under the table hard. Her mother's face immediately softened. "Oh," she said. It was the longest "oh" I had ever heard. Her father leaned back. His eyes narrowed. "Well," Richard said, "this is unexpected." "Very unexpected," Emma's younger brother, Tyler, muttered. Emma kicked him beneath the table. I nearly laughed. Nearly. Because I knew Emma well enough to understand that she wasn't embarrassed. She was scared. And that changed everything. Emma had been my roommate for 11 months. We met because the apartment we both wanted was cheap, clean, and located close enough to downtown that neither of us needed to spend half our paycheck on gas. She was 28, worked as a physical therapist, and had a habit of leaving mugs of tea everywhere. I was 30, worked at a hardware store during the day, and repaired old computers for people at night to make extra money. We weren't best friends. We weren't enemies. We were simply two adults trying to survive expensive rent, bad traffic, grocery bills, and the strange loneliness that came with living in a city where everyone seemed busy. But Emma had become important to me. Not romantically. At least, that was what I told myself. She was the person who noticed when I hadn't eaten. The person who left soup outside my bedroom when I was sick. The person who once drove 40 minutes through a thunderstorm because my car broke down at work. And I had done things for her too. When her mother was hospitalized, I drove Emma to the hospital every night for a week. When she couldn't afford her share of rent after missing work, I quietly covered it. Neither of us kept score. That was the kind of friendship we had. So when she suddenly introduced me as her boyfriend, I knew something was wrong. Dinner continued. Or at least, everyone pretended it did. Emma's mother, Susan, asked me questions about my job. Her father asked how long we'd been together. "About 3 months," Emma answered quickly. 4, I corrected. She looked at me. I shrugged. "If we're lying, we should at least coordinate." Tyler choked on his drink. Susan laughed. Even Richard's mouth twitched. For a few minutes, the tension eased. Then Susan asked the question that changed everything. "So," she said gently, "when were you planning to tell us?" Emma stopped eating. I saw her eyes lower. Richard noticed too. "Tell us what?" he asked. Emma swallowed. "About the engagement." My fork nearly fell out of my hand. Richard stood so quickly his chair scraped across the floor. "Engagement." Emma's face went white. "Dad. Are you engaged?" "No." The word came from me. Everyone stared. I looked at Emma. She looked like she might cry. Then I understood. This wasn't about pretending to be her boyfriend. This was about something much bigger. Emma finally whispered, "My parents want me to marry someone else." Richard's expression hardened. "Emma. It's true." Susan looked confused. "Sweetheart, we never said you had to marry anyone." "You didn't have to say it," Emma replied. "You made it obvious." Her voice cracked. She looked at me. I was supposed to meet David tonight. I had heard the name before. David was the son of one of Richard's business partners. Successful. Wealthy. Educated. Perfect, according to Emma's parents. Emma hated him. Not because he was cruel. Because he was. Simply a stranger she had been expected to build a life with because their families thought the match made sense. I told them I was bringing my boyfriend, Emma continued. Richard stared at me. You? Yes. Why? Emma's eyes filled with tears. Because I knew you wouldn't believe me unless I brought someone. I expected Richard to explode. Instead, he sat down. He looked suddenly older. Susan reached for Emma's hand. Why didn't you tell us how unhappy you were? Emma laughed through her tears. Because every time I tried, Mom, you told me I was lucky. Dad told me I was being practical. Everyone kept saying David was a good man. He may be, Richard said quietly. But that doesn't mean he's the right man for you. Emma looked at him. The room went still. Richard rubbed his forehead. I thought I was protecting you. From what? From struggling. Emma's voice softened. Dad, I don't need a rich husband to protect me. Richard looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at me. And you? I blinked. Me. Why did you agree to this? I could have lied. Instead, I told him the truth. Because she needed someone. Emma stared at me. I continued. That's it. She was scared, and I couldn't leave her alone in it. Richard's eyes moved toward his daughter. Something changed in his face. Maybe he finally understood. That love wasn't always about finding someone who could provide everything. Sometimes love was simply refusing to let another person face something frightening alone. Then the front door opened. A man in an expensive navy suit stepped inside. David. He looked around the dining room. Sorry I'm late. Emma froze. David's eyes landed on me. Then on Emma. Then back at me. Who's he? Emma opened her mouth. I answered. I'm her boyfriend. David stared. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. Not cruelly. Almost sadly. Okay, he said. That makes sense. Emma frowned. What does? David removed his coat. Your father called me earlier. Richard stiffened. David looked at him. I told him I wasn't interested in being part of this. Everyone went silent. Richard's face changed. You knew. I knew about the dinner. I knew about the expectations. And I knew Emma didn't want this. Emma stared at him. Why didn't you tell me? David smiled. Because I figured you deserved to tell your own family. He turned toward the door. Emma suddenly stood. Wait. David stopped. She looked at him. I'm sorry. For what? For making you part of this. David shook his head. You didn't. Then he looked at me. You're a good friend. I nodded. Thanks. David smiled. Boyfriend, apparently. I laughed. Emma did too. And somehow, that ridiculous lie became the first moment all evening that felt honest. David left. Richard remained silent for several minutes. Finally, he stood. Emma. She looked at him cautiously. I owe you an apology. Her eyes widened. Richard wasn't a man who apologized easily. I spent so much time worrying about your future that I forgot it was yours. Emma's face crumpled. She walked into his arms. Richard held her tightly. I don't care if you marry someone rich, he whispered. I don't care if you marry someone poor. I don't care if you marry a doctor, a teacher, a mechanic, or nobody at all. Emma cried against his shoulder. I just want you to be happy. Susan joined them. Tyler stood awkwardly nearby before finally wrapping his arms around everyone. I watched them and smiled. Then Susan looked at me. Jake. Yes. You're welcome here anytime. I shook my head. Even if I'm not Emma's boyfriend. She smiled. Especially then. Everyone laughed. That should have been the end of it. But 3 months later, I came home from work to find Emma sitting on the apartment floor surrounded by boxes. What happened? I asked. She looked up. I got promoted. That's great. And transferred. I froze. Where? Denver. My smile disappeared. When? 2 weeks. She looked miserable. I sat beside her. For the first time since we'd met, neither of us knew what to say. Finally, Emma whispered, "I'm scared." I looked at the boxes. Then at her. "You're going." She blinked. What? You've spent your whole life being afraid of disappointing people. Don't start disappointing yourself now. Tears appeared in her eyes. You're my best friend, Jake. I know. I don't want to leave you. I smiled. Then don't leave me. Just move. She laughed through her tears. 6 months later, Emma called me from Denver. She had found a small apartment. She loved her new job. She had made friends. She sounded happy. And then she said something I never expected. My dad changed. How? He started volunteering. I laughed. Richard? Volunteering. Every Saturday. At a shelter. I couldn't believe it. Why? Emma went quiet. Then she said, "He told me something last week." What? He said he finally understood that being a good father wasn't about controlling my future. It was about making sure I knew I was never alone. I looked out the apartment window. Snow had started falling over Columbus. That's pretty good. There's more. What? He asked about you. I smiled. What did he say? Emma laughed. He said, "How's that idiot boyfriend of yours?" I burst out laughing. Then Emma became quiet. Jake. Yeah. Thank you. For what? For that Thanksgiving dinner. I leaned back. You're welcome. No. You don't understand. Her voice trembled. You could have walked away. You could have told my parents the truth. You could have let me deal with everything alone. I stared at the snow. You needed someone. I did. And now. She took a breath. Now I know something. What? That sometimes the people who change your life aren't the people who stay forever. I swallowed. Yeah. They're the people who help you become brave enough to change your own. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she laughed. Also, my mom wants to know if you're still single. I groaned. Absolutely not. Why? Because I've already been someone's fake boyfriend. I'm not surviving your mother's matchmaking too. Emma laughed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. And in that moment, I realized something I would carry for the rest of my life. Kindness doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it's covering someone's rent when they're struggling. Sometimes it's driving through a storm. Sometimes it's sitting beside a frightened friend at a family dinner and agreeing to become a boyfriend for one night. And sometimes, the most selfless thing you can do for someone you love is help them find the courage to walk away from the life everyone else planned for them. Emma hadn't needed a boyfriend that Thanksgiving. She needed someone who would stand beside her when she finally stood up for herself. And I was grateful I had been there. Because years later, when I think about that dinner, I don't remember the awkward introductions, the fake relationship, or even the family argument. I remember Emma's father holding his daughter. I remember her mother crying. I remember David choosing honesty instead of pride. And I remember the simple truth that brought all of us together. Sometimes one small act of kindness can become the beginning of an entirely different life. You just have to be willing to stay when someone is afraid to face it alone.